today is a class that I hope many will find interesting. The subject matter itself to me has certainly been interesting. But to introduce the subject, you'll see here a picture of a cracked foundation. There's some sidewalk or foundation cracks in the foundation. Reads a discussion of changes in ISKCON's culture, thought, and practice. And that, of course, is foreboding that, well, there's going to be some negative remarks in this. But that does not mean that it's simply just criticism for the sake of criticism. It's just like if you have a house and all of a sudden you discover in your foundation there's a crack in it, you're going to want to do something about it, isn't it? So in the same way, if we live in Prabhupada's house, and there's for some reason or another, that there's a crack in the foundation, A, we want to know about it, and B, we want to do something about it. So this talk today is going to focus on some of these cracks that have appeared, and whether you agree with the premise of this presentation or not, one must certainly agree that there's some existing rift or some differences that present an existential challenge to the continuation of the Krishna consciousness movement. So, to begin with, we just want to dedicate this presentation to His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He is certainly the foremost Acharya of Krishna consciousness in this age. He was given the mercy by his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, and the Acharyas, all the Acharyas before him, and Lord Sri Krishna himself, Sri Radha Krishna, empowered him to spread the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. And as his followers, in this case my Guru Maharaj, and head of and leader of many disciples and followers within ISKCON, Srila Bhakti Vikas Swami, who has very kindly requested me to try to present something on these topics here. So we'll try to do justice to that. So this lecture is in three parts. One is on Western history and culture, another is on Western philosophy, and a third is finally on the influence of these ideas in the Krishna consciousness movement. So, about 10 years ago, I wrote an essay when ISKCON's first constitution, drafted a constitution, came out. Prabhupada asked us to make a constitution. The constitution came out, and although that's a good idea, why a constitution is a good idea, constitutions do three things, according to scholars of law. One, they define the government. The second thing they do is they define the relationship of the government with the people. And the third thing they do is that they serve as a repository of values of the people in the country. So those are three important roles that a Hare Krishna. Thank you. Those are three important functions that a constitution does. Now, a constitution is not always necessary. Like England, for example, they have a constitutional monarchy, they have a parliament, and so forth, but they don't actually have a constitution. They have tradition, they have laws that have come up here and there that everybody follows by convention. So another feature of constitutions is that constitutions you typically find them in new societies. Old societies don't always need constitutions because they already have well-established traditions. So a constitution itself establishes a certain tradition, certain conventions that everybody henceforward is going to follow. So at the time, I felt that that there were certain issues that were not settled in ISKCON, or there were certain ideas that, if they became baked into ISKCON's constitution, then it would set in place, or bake in place, a very difficult thing, a very problematic set of ideas with a corresponding set of practices that would be very difficult to erase and would be very detrimental to people's devotional service. So I wrote that paper explaining some of these problems and why I thought it was not a good idea at this time to have a constitution. So 10 years later, just as I was reviewing that paper for this discussion, for this presentation, not much has changed since then. And so we're going to talk about some of those things. So the first part here is Western history and culture. So next slide, please. So I want to talk about the watershed moment in the West that's considered the big turning point, where the West became less controlled by religion and more controlled by rational thought, is a period what's called the Enlightenment. And that period extends from about, say, maybe like 1750 or maybe earlier than that, a little earlier than that, to 1789, which is the French Revolution. Now, to understand why the Western Enlightenment was such a big watershed moment, we have a very brief timeline here. We have William of Ockham, who propounded the philosophy of nominalism. Then that was in the 13th and 14th centuries. And then we have the Renaissance and the scientific revolution in the 14th or 17th centuries. So we have a revival of Greek and Latin classics. We have the development of humanism, which eventually becomes a secular humanism. Scientific revolution, people start to notice that certain things, natural processes happening in the world, can be described efficiently and effectively with math. Then the Enlightenment itself, the 18th century through 1789, the French Revolution, what happened there is that all the discoveries of the scientific revolution in the Renaissance, they tried to apply to human agencies, politics, economics, society, and so forth. And one of the big achievements of the Enlightenment was the disestablishment of Western religious authority, which at that time, of course, was Christianity. Industrial Revolution. Is there more to this on there? Or no, that's not. Okay, this is an incomplete slide, I apologize. So you have the Industrial Revolution, and then you have later on the Sexual Revolution, which is also very important. Okay, so next slide. Nominalism. So nominalism is, interestingly enough, considered to be the scourge of Western society and culture by the Roman Catholic Church, at least by its more conservative theologians. For example, George Weigel, a prominent public intellectual and Roman Catholic theologian, in one of his innumerable essays declared that there was a nuclear explosion, in the 13th century. And that explosion was nominalism, by William of Ockham. So William of Occam's, he was a monk, he was a Franciscan monk, and he got into a lot of trouble with the church because he's famous for what's known as Occam's razor, is that the simplest explanation is usually the best explanation, isn't it? You know, we've heard of this. Yeah, that's Occam's razor. So this is William of Occam. So he got into trouble with the church because that brought him into conflict with the Trinity. Why do you need 3 people when one will do just fine? So he started questioning these things, and people started getting heavy on him. So, you know, we know how that can go sometimes, isn't it? You start questioning things, and so nominalism. It's the idea that categories are imaginary. In other words, there's only individual, there are only particulars. Okay? So, according to George Weigel, for example, he says that, well, if there are only particulars, then there you can have no such thing as the common good, right? So if there's no such thing as the common good, then you only have these competing goods. You know, you have Thomas Hobbes's war of all against all. In fact, you can see that there's that kind of connection between Hobbes as a later British, social philosopher in his social contract. That's really a kind of like a outgrowth of nominalism there. So Richard Weaver, a English professor, mid 20th century English professor and Catholic, and he wrote something along these themes. He called these categories transcendentals, and that's a very interesting. That's a very interesting synonym for these categories here. So he also agrees with Weigel, or actually he preceded Weigel, but they share that common belief that the rejection of transcendentals, or the rejection of these categories, resulted in the birth of modern science. Because if you only have individuals, if you only have particulars, then it stands to reason that the only thing that's worth studying are the particulars. Okay? So now we're going to study atoms, we're going to study the world, we're going to study the phenomena, and so forth like that. So combined with Christian, the Christian eschatology, or the study of the end of times, that God is moving us to some sort of end in time. You have also another idea called historicism, which we'll talk about later. So now people are studying, the church, the people in the church, and your scientists or intellectuals, they're diverted to studying the world because they're convinced that God is doing something in the world, and that to study the world is to study God. Okay? So just before we move on, there's a little note here at the bottom that William of Occam thought, well, God, he could, because he's a voluntarist, that God can do anything he wants. He could appear as an ox, he can appear as a cow or a donkey or whatnot, or even a half man, half donkey. That really got him into hot water with the church. Why that got him into hot water is just a little tangent here, is that the church, because of Thomas Aquinas, he imported almost wholesale Aristotelian philosophy in terms of ontologies and even epistemology. In fact, in his Summa Theologica, he refers to Aristotle as the philosopher. In either scare quotes or big letters or whatever. He is the philosopher. And Aristotle's philosophy of hylomorphism is significant in this regard, because hylomorphism is a combination of form and substance. So, for example, you have a bronze sphere. A bronze sphere is a combination of the form of a sphere and the substance of bronze. So because of this philosophy of hylomorphism, Aristotle disbelieved in reincarnation. Because how could a cat, how could the soul be the same in, say, like the body of a cat or a dog and a human being? No, the human being has to have and so he came up that there's a human soul, and there's cat souls, and there's dog souls, and so forth. That's because of his idea of hylomorphism. Hylomorphism, hylomorphism. So he rejected reincarnation because, that's not possible according to, hylomorphism. Human souls can only inhabit human bodies, and so forth. So that's why he got into. That's one of the reasons he got into trouble with the church, because it contradicted church dogma on that point. So anyway, the important point from this is nominalism. Nominalism created the interest and the intellectual direction for studying very intimately the material phenomena. So next slide, please. So after William of Ockham, we come to Renaissance humanism. So the humanists, I'll just read this up here. This is an entry from Wikipedia. They say the humanists believed that it is important to transcend the afterlife with a perfect mind and body, which could be attained with education. The purpose of humanism was to create a universal man whose person combined intellectual and physical excellence and was capable of functioning honorably in virtually any situation. This ideal was referred to as the Uomo Universale, an ancient Greco-Roman ideal. So, a very interesting concept here. To transcend the afterlife, you do it with a perfect mind and body, which can be attained with education. So here we see the emphasis of the church and the philosophy of the time on the mind, on the intellect. So we can even see that today that it's believed that moral behavior comes from the intelligence. So therefore you have colleges and different professions, they have these ethics classes. Say you're going to become an accountant, CPA, chartered accountant, then you have to take some ethics courses, because that's what's going to help you become ethical. And then, you have in school, it's, the education is kind of like a blend of ethics, and they keep you in school, and the longer they keep you in school, the more ethical you're going to become. But really what we see, that the longer people stay in school, the more degraded they become, because, the schools, they hand out contraceptives, and so it actually has the opposite effect. But one thing this shows is that faith is stronger than fact. People believe, because people believe so much that the intellect or the intelligence is the seat of, is the highest human faculty, they therefore translate that into a real public policy. Education, you look at the universities today, you'll find, in America at least, you'll find that half the classes that you have to take as an undergraduate are these humanities classes. You might not care about the humanities. Maybe you want to study computers or science or something like that. But no, you've got to become a whole person. Because if you're a whole person, you're a moral person. So that's where this is coming from. So this is the another point here is the emphasis on mind and body. So what you have here is a materialism. Is that you're going to transcend death in the body. So an important point here is that this idea of transcendentals, it does not apply to the conception of the self. The self is there, but the self is ultimately a material thing. who was it? Was it Aquinas also? No, I'm trying to think of the Catholic theologian. Yeah, I believe it was Aquinas. It was Aquinas. He said that he gave some ontological reasons for God's existence. So one of them is if things have a beginning, then they necessarily have an end. And so, that just doesn't apply to God. So, but he applied that to souls, okay? That the souls, that's still, there's something that's created by God. And you'll notice, of course, that we have a different understanding. The soul is eternal. It's like God in that, but souls are not like God. So it's a material imposition again. They don't really, the idea of the self is still a materialistic conception. Next slide. So now we come to the scientific revolution. Now, the scientific revolution fundamentally transformed Western society in some very important ways. One of the important aspects of the scientific revolution is that it grew out of the Renaissance revival of the ancients. One of the important points about the Renaissance was that at a certain point, people started going around different monasteries, different private collections, and discovering all these Greek and Latin classics. And one thing they noticed about them is that the authorship, in terms of the philosophy, the thought, the depth, the style, and so forth, were so much superior to anything anybody at the time was reading or was writing in those days, that they made it, the Renaissance humanists made it the cornerstone of education. That in order to become a refined person, you had to learn from the ancients. So the ancients, one of the contributions of the ancients to Western thought was especially coming from the Greeks, because the Greeks, at a certain point in their history, their intellectuals rejected the Greek pantheon, the Greek religion, and so they were natural philosophers. They were coming up with trying to understand ways in which the world came about without reference to all these gods and goddesses. And so this made a big impression on humanist intellectuals, on Renaissance intellectuals, and so they took some of these ideas and they developed them. So other of these ideas, you had heliocentrism with Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo. They showed that mathematically and more parsimoniously that this heliocentric theory of the universe was better explained in a more mathematically precise way than Ptolemy's Haribo. Hare Krishna. So they presented a more compelling theory of how the heavens worked. Also came the idea that natural processes follow mathematical principles. Galileo, he was the first to explicitly state this. Rationalism, Descartes, he posited the separation between mind and body, and he performed many different rational thought experiments in order to understand, in order to A, validate his own religious experience, and B, validate his consciousness. He's the one that said, "I think, therefore I am." Empiricism, Sir Francis Bacon, he was considered one of the founders of modern science, and Sir Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz. This whole scientific revolution culminated in their mathematical studies, especially with Newton's Principia Mathematica, which is like the first complete description of like higher mathematics, calculus, Both Leibniz and Newton developed calculus. And there are a lot of very good mathematicians in those days as well. So next slide is important because in the Enlightenment, as I mentioned, that after this glorious scientific revolution, they were discovering all sorts of things, the intellectuals of the day were thinking, well, by human endeavor, now we've understood so many things about the universe that just weren't in our holy books or weren't taught by Aristotle or other things. And also, now, with these new tools of the scientific revolution, let's try to improve the human condition. So that was the Enlightenment. So they tried to apply this to politics, Hobbes, Paine, Locke, Voltaire, Rousseau. What that resulted in is the delegitimization of the monarchy, positive rights. Positive rights were, this is more the French philosophers. They believed at the time that positive rights means you have the right to all sorts of goods in society. You have the right to a good job. You have the right to an education, and so forth. Whereas the English philosophers, they argued, or they put forth the idea that you have negative rights. For example, the right to free speech. Okay, that's not a positive right, but it's a negative right because they're saying that, well, this is something the government cannot interfere with in your life. Right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Okay, so that's... government can interfere with other aspects of your life, but they can't interfere with that. Property rights. John Locke especially propounded property rights. You have property rights, the government can't just come in and take it away without, sufficient justification. Then you have economics. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, written in 1776, the very year of the American Revolution. The invisible hand of the market, of the economy. Malthus, a priest, he was infamous for arguing that overpopulation is going to starve everybody and cause wars and pestilence and famine and so forth. Human nature. One of the casualties of the Enlightenment was that there's no such thing as a fixed human nature. In other words, for example, if you're not born a nobleman, you're not born a worker, you're not born, even the idea, the first beginnings of feminism occur in this era. Mary Wollstonecraft, we haven't mentioned here. She wrote a famous essay called Vindication of the Rights of Woman that was patterned after a similar essay called The Vindication of the Rights of Man. So this is where we start to see that a wholesale rejection of the idea that there's such a thing as a natural order, that people have their place, that there's that people actually have a certain nature that predisposes them to certain moral behaviors. So just to compare and contrast this with Vedic understanding is that the whole idea of varna is that you have an occupation that is appropriate for your level for your moral tendencies. So Prabhupada, he divided, when he talks about societies, the varnashram, especially Varna Dharma, he talks about first class, second class, third class, fourth class man in terms of the characteristics. So first class man, he's truthful, he's clean, he's austere, he's learned in the Shastras, he's religious and so forth. So he's a first class man. Kshatriya, however, sometimes he has to tell a lie, he has to do diplomacy. So he's not truthful, but he has his place in society. You need a class of people who can do these things. Sometimes when you're dealing with people who are not so nice, you need not so nice people to deal with them. So that's the second class man. Third class man, merchant. For you, my dear sir, I make no profit. So he has to tell a lie. And then a Shudra, we were just reading recently, Prabhupada, he was talking about in a letter about marriage and divorce, how among all the three classes, the three higher classes, no one in any of the three higher castes will ever divorce or commit adultery or any of these things. They're expected to follow these principles. But the Shudras, it's expected of them that they will do these things, that they'll divorce, they'll remarry, they'll do all sorts of, abominable things. Perhaps short of eating a dog or a cow like that. But anyway, the big point about the Varna Dharma is that your occupation is suitable for your moral predisposition. We don't want third class, we don't want fourth class people in the position of brahmanas, for obvious reasons, or kshatriyas, or vice versa. We don't want that. So the Enlightenment philosophers did away with that. They did away with that. So here are some political outcomes from that. So the United States was the first Enlightenment nation. They took these ideas, especially the Lockean British ideas of liberty, and enshrined that in the U.S. Constitution. And just the general principles, the Declaration of Independence and so forth. Then the French Revolution was considered the end of the Enlightenment because also based on Enlightenment philosophers, especially Rousseau, resulted in the Reign of Terror. It was just, it was just bloody. It was like 50,000 people were just executed in that reign. So that wasn't supposed to happen. The Enlightenment was supposed to have a happy result, but the Reign of Terror was a very unhappy result, and so that pretty much, ended it right there. So back to the drawing board for that. So continuing on, next slide. The next important developments in the West were the agricultural and industrial revolutions. So what happened in Britain, there was this. What happened is that different tools, techniques, and some amount of mechanization was employed that increased the yield, crop yields, yields from animal husbandry, and what that did is that actually freed up a lot of people to work in factories. So now a smaller number of people in the population could support the population in terms of their food. And now you had more people to work. And because you had the Industrial Revolution going on at more or less the same time, well, you had a place to employ these new workers. So the Industrial Revolution, the shift of production of goods from handmade to machine-made. So that was one of the big changes. Interestingly enough, Gandhi, in his Quit India movement, they rejected that. And our Prabhupada also, he also, rejected that's not the, machinery in industrial production is not the basis of a good civilization. Then increased standards of living. Now, some will call this higher standard of living, but increased standards of living mean that they have more needs, more desires, more wants, and so forth. So that's going to be problematic in terms of your happiness. The more you need, the more difficult it is to secure, and the more misery you have to go through to secure it. So ironically, where the Industrial Revolution was supposed to make people happier, it actually made people more miserable. Another effect of the Industrial Revolution is it allowed women to come into the workforce. Now that you had machines, a lot of the work, a lot of the hard manual labor could now be also taken up effectively by women. Because the machines were augmenting human capabilities in that way. Then after those revolutions, we can say arguably, beginning even in the mid-1800s, you had a bloody 20th century. You had World Wars I, World War II, you can even put the Franco-Prussian War, at the end of the 19th century there, the Cold War. World War II especially, at the end of World War II in the United States and also in Europe, for the first time, In Western society, you had more women in society than men. So, very interesting situation you see here, that the Gita talks about the destruction of the family and women being able to mix in society. So what the Gita is talking about is not something just particular to the time when Krishna was present, personally, but he's talking about something that we see in society from time to time. Sometimes societies have big wars and they kill each other off in large numbers. And the people who tend to kill each other off in large numbers tend to be men. And then when the men are gone, then, the women, they can intermingle in society, and so forth. So we had a similar thing happening here in America and Europe, in the 20th century. And of course, when all the men were off fighting in the war, the women went to the factories. And because factories couldn't allow women to do all these things men were doing, and once the women were in the workforce, they really didn't want to go back. And then finally, the last big relevant revolution is the sexual revolution of the 1960s and the 1980s. One thing, this was very much the outcome of advances in medical technology, even in terms of the early 19th century, or not 19th century, but 20th century, and even earlier than that, say about 1875 in the United States, for example, there were passed a set of laws called the Comstock laws. And what the Comstock laws were supposed to do is they were supposed to punish immorality around the use of contraception. So even as far back as 1875, you were starting to see efficient methods of contraception disseminate in society. So that's what those laws were supposed to counteract. And of course, as we know, that didn't last very long because there was a huge demand for it. What was happening is that in industrial society, that people were kids were no longer economically valuable because your father was working away in the factory, and unless the kids were in the factory, they weren't making much. They were just mouths to feed. So the fewer kids you had, the more money you had. That was strong pressure even back then to use contraceptives. Then the early 20th century, you had a personality named Margaret Sanger, who was really almost like a one-woman force who just completely overturned any such laws and made it broadly acceptable, at least legal in the United States. So the sexual revolution also normalized sexual relationships outside of marriage. Because we live in this time, we're very familiar with that. We know what's going on. And also, not only efficient contraception, but safe abortion enabled women to participate in the workforce generally, alongside with men. So now you've got a situation where men and women really, really can commingle. And so then some of the consequences of that are that you have a society in which not only sexual relationships outside of marriage are normalized, but also divorce is normalized. The current statistics from the U.S. government are that 40% of all births in this country today are born out of wedlock. The women aren't married and they're having this. And 40%. That's a statistic reported from the U.S. Center for Disease Control. Actually, it's 42%. And so, and according to different ethnic groups, that number will be a lot higher or a lot lower, but the mean now is 40%. So, next slide, please. So, Western thought. So, just a little in-depth focus, just to bring this a little bit closer to Krishna consciousness and what's going on. I'll try to go over this quickly. So some terms to know: historicism and materialism. We have three philosophers here. The first one is named Hegel, Georg Hegel. The second one, very teeny tiny one, is Ludwig Feuerbach. And the third one is Karl Marx. Now, what all these three have to do with each other is they represent a kind of like a line of thought, a developing line of thought. The first is actually two thoughts by Hegel. One is called the Zeitgeist, or the spirit of the times. That you live in a certain time, there's a certain spirit, and that spirit really defines your personality. Another one of Hegel's contributions is historicism. Now, there's always been an idea of historicism in Western thought. Just like the Christians, they have this idea that God is moving through the world and bringing us to a certain point. So there's a certain idea of progress. We're making progress towards that point where God will come again. Okay? So Hegel secularized that we're making some sort of progress, and that this progress he defined in terms of a dialectic. That you have, say, like some idea in society, or you have some social institution, like you have the nobles, and then you have the workers, and then that you have a contradictory, then you have something contradictory to that in society, and this inherent contradiction plays out in a kind of conflict, or you can call it a dialectic. And then when the two warring parties exhaust each other, then a new reality emerges from that, which is better and is rooted in those two previous contradictions, but is superior and better to it. And then that cycle repeats itself. In other words, we're always making progress. So Ludwig Feuerbach, he's important in this, in that he rejected the intellectual or the spiritual basis of Hegel's historicism. And so he said that, well, because God is simply the sum total of all of an idealization of all of man's attributes, the study of God is really the study of man. And so he rejected the spiritual basis of Hegel's historicism and gave it a material basis. And Karl Marx ran with that. And so Karl Marx, he developed that idea further. And so he says here, and I'll read this quote, "The mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness." So you get that? In other words, our consciousness is determined by our society. So we're not conscious, it's just the society that's reflected through us. That's why if you talk with a Marxist about moral behavior, they get annoyed very quickly. Because it's not moral, a person's rioting not because of moral behavior, but because of social inequality. Marxists generally do not ascribe any agency to personal responsibility or any kind of freedom of thought. So we just covered the dialectical process, dialectical materialism. That's just that in material society, that according to natural laws, contradictory things in a conflict, they produce something superior, state of existence. So societies between, say, capitalism and the workers and the contradiction of that is going to produce a socialist society. A socialist society will eventually produce a communist society, and so forth. So these are supposed to be natural laws of human behavior that are supposed to work like this. It's where we get our ideas of progress and progressivism, because we're always making progress. Next slide, please. Consequentialism. So consequentialism, this is the moral philosophy that governs the modern Anglo-American society, and to some extent also the continental European societies, but especially your Anglo-American countries and societies. So types of consequentialism: utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham, the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. John Stuart Mill try to refine that, because it's not, sometimes it's a qualitative, sometimes it's the, there are qualitative aspects of happiness. It's not all, like more food equals more happiness. Sometimes, art, finer sentiments, philosophy. John Stuart Mill was also noted for having observed that there's something called the tyranny of the majority. Maybe 51% of your people in society are very happy, making the rest of the 49% miserable. Well, that's not a very good situation. Mill argued against that, refined his, utilitarianism to avoid that. Pragmaticism. This is an American version of that, influential American version. I'll just read this quote here. This is by William James. William James is considered one of the founders of modern psychology. John Dewey, very influential American in American education. My grandfather, in fact, he studied under him a little bit. I don't know what he studied, but all I know is that he knew Dewey. Pragmatism agrees with nominalism, for instance, in always appealing to particulars. With positivism, it's disdain for verbal solutions, useless questions, and metaphysical abstractions. All these, you see, are anti-intellectualist tendencies. Against rationalism as a pretension and a method, pragmatism is fully armed and militant. But at the outset, at least, it stands for no particular results. It has no dogmas and no doctrine save its method. And he also says, true ideas are those that we can assimilate, validate, corroborate, and verify. False ideas are those that we cannot. Truth happens to an idea. It becomes true. It is made true by events. In other words, true is what is useful to you at any point. So that reveals one of the big problems with consequentialism, is it's all very relativistic. If you think something is good, the chances are you think you're doing the right thing. But we can see that large groups of people can also actually objectively be doing the wrong thing while believing they're doing the right thing. So the big idea, an action is moral if it produces a good result. Next slide. Existentialism. Very briefly, existentialism is the idea that existence precedes essence, as Jean-Paul Sartre termed it. The idea is that, as he explained it, is at first, the idea that essence precedes existence. You have like a paper cutter, and because you have the idea of a paper cutter, you produce a paper cutter. But this turns it around, is that somehow or other the paper cutter comes into existence. And so in a similar way, we exist, and then somehow or other our actual abilities, our essence comes into existence. Some examples of this, like there is an old U.S. Army ad, "Be all that you can be, join the Army." Okay, that's the existentialist. That's the existentialist army. That's just an example of it. Find yourself, because you don't know who you are yet. Next slide. Feminism, something we're very familiar with. The idea of the social, economic, and political equality between men and women. They're social constructivists. So, immediately we can see the strong connection with Marxism. He believes that it's society that creates consciousness. So, if we can only just adjust society, then men and women will be equal. Denies difference between male and female. This is a instance of impersonalism. Srila Prabhupada talks about how the impersonalists, they encourage mundane sex by denying the difference between the real differences between men and women. Precursor to and closely aligned with the gay rights movement. Next slide. So, just a brief recap here. Marxism asserts a material basis of identity. Idea of historical progress opposes Vedic idea of cyclical history. Consequentialism, subjectivist morality. If it feels good, do it. Man is the measure of all things moral. Protagoras, in terms of moral philosophy. Existentialism, subjectivist epistemology. You are the only person who knows the most about you. No one knows more about you than you do. It's like the joke. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? They say none, because the light bulb has to want to change itself. That's an existentialist joke there, and you didn't know it. Existentialism reinforces the idea that there's no such thing as a fixed human nature, or fixed human natures, right? Because, existence precedes essence. Feminism, deep roots in the above three areas. Impersonalism denies the difference between male and female, promotes illicit sex. Continuing on. Next slide. Part 3, called this Invading the Sankirtan Movement. I named that after, it's a take on a book written by a public intellectual named, what's his name? Oh, I can't remember. Indian fellow. Oh, I hope he doesn't hear this because he'll reprimand me for forgetting his name. I'm sorry. My apologies. The book was called Invading the Sacred. Does anyone remember the Rajiv Malhotra? Thank you. You just saved me. Rajiv Malhotra. Yes, a very excellent book, actually. Just one note about that book, after reading all the excesses of the academics, against, the Hindu community and arguably against, the Vedic culture and literature, I was wondering why ISKCON was not involved in that debate, that whole debate from the beginning. We missed a huge opportunity. But there is a reason for that, I suspect, which we'll get to later. Here's the big topics. Cultural divide in ISKCON. Where did it come from? Where is it headed? Just flash back to the other slides here. We can probably see where some of that is coming from already. Embracing impersonalism, materialism and hedonism. These are things that are going on in our society. Cracks. Now, I just want to say that that doesn't mean we're not iconoclast here. We're not trying to bring down any leaders or the movement, but we do need to talk about these things. So let's go on from the big topics here. Mothers and masters. This is the current hot topic, or the title that I preferred, Women, Masters or Mothers. Why did that book evoke such a pointed backlash among many members of our society? How come? So first, there's a deep attachment to the idea that men and women materially are not different. Of course, there's some, everyone will accept that yes, there's something to women, there's something different about women, there's something different about men. And women can produce children, and men can help in producing children. But when you take away those differences, and say, especially in an industrial economy, you're left with people who most of their work is done with machines. You might tempted to think that men and women are equal. Now, what's very interesting about this is that the deep attachment to this idea is similar to the deep attachment of the impersonalist. It said, Mayavada Bhashi Shunile Hayasar Vinash. This is the one group of people that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could not deliver, or did not deliver. Could not deliver, because they somehow or other avoided him. That attachment to the impersonal conception of the truth, or this attachment to Mayavad, is so strong. It was stronger than any of the other deviations, like the logicians. The logicians were actually the first to be converted to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, but not the Mayavadis, not the impersonalists. So the feminism is very much like impersonalism in that denial of difference. It's an attachment. We're one. We're like, we're spirit souls, Prabhu. So there should be no difference. This attachment is reinforced very strongly by association with karmis, with non-devotees, karmis and jnanis, especially because we work in the world. We associate with non-devotees every day, and so these are going to become your friends. You're going to develop friendly relations with them. You want them to like you, and so forth. So you're going to change your religion to fit in, to accommodate these people. That's what happens in most cases. So we want to be accepted, strong desire. So here, I just want to read this. Prabhupada says here in his purport to Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1, he says, the original fact is in the absolute truth, and thus the original fact is the absolute truth, and thus the absolute truth cannot be impersonal. It is not possible to be impersonal and contain pure sex life. Consequently, the impersonalist philosophers have given indirect impetus to the abominable mundane sex life because they have overstressed the impersonality of the ultimate truth. Consequently, man without information of the actual spiritual form of sex has accepted the perverted material sex life as the all in all. In other words, from the idea of equality, especially mundane equality, the overemphasis of this point that we're spirit souls, comes mundane sex life. Yes, we're spirit souls, but can you act on the platform of spirit souls? And we find also that even just saying that we're spirit souls, well, it's devoid of a conception of variety. Okay, well, what is your Swarup Siddhi? Are you a man, male spirit soul, or a female spirit soul? Because there is sex in the spiritual world. Different sexes. There are men, there are women. You read in the Bhagavatam that in Vaikuntha Loka that there are men and women flying around in airplanes and so forth. So this idea that just we're spirit souls is missing something. Even as we talk about it, oftentimes it's missing something. So that's according to this purport, according to Srila Prabhupada, that is an indirect impetus for mundane sex life. And that organizes a lot of the data we see around us. So, next slide. So, ISKCON secularization. It's not a nice term to apply to a society, but it's an apt term. So, these are just some quotes here. I want to read from. Mostly these are from a ISKCON observer and sociologist, Burke Rochford. Most of you know who he is or you know about him. So this is from his book, Hare Krishna Transformed. So one of the last chapters is called Worldly Accommodation. So he reports matter-of-factly about ISKCON's aligning itself with the world. So these are some of his statements. In the midst of ISKCON's being overtaken by Indian Hindu immigrants during the 1980s and the 1990s, its long-standing members were establishing lives in American society. Worldly accommodation brought about a new round of cultural development centered on reshaping ISKCON's traditional religious culture to fit the changing needs of families and the larger devotee community. As one ISKCON devotee remarked, quote, "We have many members who view Krishna consciousness as the religion rather than a complete way of life," unquote. And he says, correctly in my opinion, such a statement is emblematic of the dramatic changes that ISKCON's membership has undergone over the past 3 decades. So, there's another chapter in there where he talks about the women's rights movement and the traditionalist backlash, of which our Guru Maharaj and a number of us are mentioned by name in. He remarks at the end of the chapter that as ISKCON redefined its the way. In order to get around some of Srila Prabhupada's statements about men and women and their social roles, They had to reweight Srila Prabhupada's behavior so that we're not going to take everything that Srila Prabhupada says seriously, literally, because to be a literalist is to curry disfavor with the karmis and the gyanis that we were talking about. But we're going to try to understand it in a way that was that it's more like in line with their values. So what that means is that there's a lot of what Srila Prabhupada says that just all of a sudden becomes not relevant to world. So anyway, that's what he's getting at here. Such a statement is emblematic of the dramatic changes. So these are dramatic changes. We've gone from taking whatever the Shastra says and whatever Guru Maharaj says literally, that this is a way of life, that we can't translate it into a way of life anymore. It's just our religion. Next slide, please. Therapy. This is also quoted from Rochefort. Given the need for healing, unquote, counseling and therapy services have proliferated throughout the movement, aided by the substantial number of devotees who have gone back to school to gain professional training and credentials. As one woman commented, quote, in most communities you will find devotees to go to for family counseling or personal counseling. So this has become much stronger within our movement, where 20 years ago it was a dirty word. Next slide. In 2003, ISKCON's... So one important point is that these ideas of secular of these non-Krishna conscious ideas of well-being have proliferated throughout the society. So this slide, it drives home the point that this is coming from the top down. It's not like a grassroots thing, but it's actually coming from the top down in our society. So in 2003, ISKCON's North American Office of Communications sponsored a conference, Therapy and Social Care, a Krishna conscious perspective. Conference participants played a lead role in organizing the growing number of ISKCON professionals in the field of counseling and mental health care. The Vaishnava Alliance of Care Providers and a national system of peer counseling were established to help devotees with problems in their lives. Okay, this is coming from the top down. The big question is, if we have the Hare Krishna, the chanting of the Hare Krishna, and we have this whole, varnashram, this social system, why are we going to the secular authorities for well-being? Good question, isn't it? Why are we doing that? But we're doing it. And it's being driven from the top down in our society as well. Next slide. Hedonism. So here's the reason. The reason why this is becoming a top-down affair, why we're going this way, is because of close association with non-devotees. We'll read this. We also affirm the importance of nurturing strong marriages, encouraging harmony in families, improving the welfare of children, ensuring the protection and care of women, discouraging divorce, and enlivening grihastha men and women in Krishna service. We hereby pledge ourselves and will encourage our regional and other senior leaders to promote an environment conducive to successful Krishna-conscious family life in ISKCON temples, communities, confront and correct any preaching or teaching that undermines the health and strength of the Grihastha ashram or discriminates against spiritually based Grihastha life. Okay, neutral, but with the last slide, the next slide, next slide please. Now, take a look at this. This is from a brochure on the Vaishnav family research. The link is there. You can see that. So this is from a brochure. Like a threefold brochure, like how to have a successful marriage. I think it was titled like six factors in a strong marriage. So this first one, quality time. Spend time with the things that are important to us, the things that we value. Making time for a relationship communicates that we are committed to and value our marriage. Your spouse and you can make a list of activities you each like to do and then regularly do things together that you both enjoy. Have fun. Okay? Next one. This is, no, not next slide, sorry, back. Back one slide. Yeah. Okay, this is not quality time, but this is another one. I think it's like economics or something. Yeah. Find a good book or attend a seminar that can help you learn to budget so that you can live within your means. Not bad advice, actually. I'm not against learning, using material things for Krishna's service, believe me. Manage your money or it may dismantle your marriage. It could lead to problems, definitely. A spiritual economic principle is to give a percentage of our income back to God. Everything comes from the Lord, and we express our gratitude by giving to Him without expecting anything in return. And where we may have no expectations when we give to the Lord, He returns it manifold. Well, there's kind of some expectation that just crept in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
The pitch is heavy on expectations, like... Return on investment. Teamwork. This is another gem here. A marital team, your spouse and you functioning as a unit to achieve your goals, whatever those are, is most successful when each player knows his or her individual responsibilities. Early in the relationship, expectations should be discussed and agreed upon. Ambiguous or unspoken expectations can lead to disappointments and resentments that erode the positive esteem between your spouse and you. If you are living a Krishna conscious life following the program, what expectations are we talking about? Really? It's just, what's going on here. So one thing, and even there's another one that we couldn't fit on here that was talking about avoiding relationships with other men and women to keep your marriage intact. But the purpose, okay, so we see consequentialism here. You're doing this for a certain consequence. You avoid dealing with other men and women to keep your marriage intact, right? That's a consequence, because so you're going to avoid dealing with married women. But here's the problem with consequentialism. What if you can figure out some way to do that and keep your marriage intact? It's like truth. Actually, Max Weber, he wrote a very influential thesis called, was it Protestantism in the Spirit of Capitalism? At the beginning of the 20th century. Still a very influential treatise on sociology. Still a seminal work. So he noted that Benjamin Franklin, he said that he gave also a consequentialist, explanation of morality. So we're truthful so that people will trust us. And he criticized that. Why? Because, if you can get people to trust you anyway without being truthful, why be truthful? Same thing is going on here. Even the idea of avoiding male-female association is corrupted by the consequentialism. Yes, of course, you want to keep healthy and happy marriages, but that is not the point of marriage. Next slide, please. Now, evaluate. These are the 3 verses from the 18th chapter that talk about happiness in the different modes of nature. Now, which of these 3 verses describes the mode of happiness that characterizes the advice given in the last slide? Which one? Anyone? 38. That happiness which is derived of contact of the senses with their objects and which appears like nectar at first but poison at the end is said to be of the nature of passion. So here's the big problem, and this is why those previous slides were labeled hedonism, is because the conception of marriage that's being taught, even within our society, by people who are supposed to be experts, and this expertise, make no mistake, is coming from these professional training. The conception is one of material happiness, contact of the objects with their senses. So this is just not going to make people happy. That happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects and which appears like nectar at first but poison at the end is the nature of passion. Now that organizes a lot of data, doesn't it? It explains why there are so many divorces in society, so much problem with out-of-wedlock birth, not just in Karmi society, but even in our society. It's a problem, isn't it? Here's the point. The point of marriage, or any kind of dharma, is to actually promote you to above the modes of nature. That's the real point. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about, renunciation in the mode of passion. What is he? He says, Dukam ityeva yat karma, kaya klesha beat tyajet. Was it sakritva rajasam tyagam naiva tyaga palam labet? That if one gives up his prescribed duty as troublesome or out of fear of bodily discomfort, that's a renunciation in the mode of passion. And such renunciation, naiva tyaga palam labet, does not elevate you to the platform of renunciation. And what's renunciation? Renunciation, sarva karma palatyagam, that you're giving up the results of all your activities. That's a prerequisite to being able to do bhakti, right? So here's a salient point, is that the way that marriage is being taught in our society, from the top down, is actually taking us away from that. It's actually preventing us. It's actually a stumbling block for us to be able to come to the platform of developing pure devotional service. This is actually spiritual violence. So we can talk more about that later. There's a couple other slides I want to go through real quickly that just drive home this point. Next slide. Well, actually, one more point is that the whole reason that we're in marriage is not to have a happy marriage. We're in marriage to actually learn. For those of us who are married, and this applies to any status of life, we do our dharma in order to become transcendental to the modes of nature. That's the point. Isn't it? So you can pray to the demigods for a good marriage, and you can get a good marriage. So the whole idea that we're trying to have good and happy and healthy marriages is bogus. You're in the marriage to learn how to transcend the modes of nature. So I'll just very quickly talk about, my wife and I, we had, when we got married, it was an arranged marriage, and, it was rocky. We almost killed each other for about 10 years. But every time we thought, this is it, she had reason to walk out on me, I had reasons to walk out on her in various points, good reasons. We thought, what are our gurus going to say? What are our friends going to say? We've married in front of Krishna. We always came to that point, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. And at the time, we just weren't thinking that we're going to save up some spiritual brownie points. But just think about it. If you're doing something for Guru and Krishna, that's mode of goodness, isn't it? Yeah. It's purifying. It may be like poison at first, but it's nectar in the end. And sure enough, over the years, we found that all these things that used to set us off, they just melted away, just as if by magic. So that's the conception of marriage we have to promote. And you're never going to get this from the psychologists, the sociologists, because they don't have that conception of happiness in the mode of goodness. They just don't. It doesn't go beyond the mode of passion. And that's the big problem with this proliferation of the psychology, the marriage counseling. It's promoting the mode of passion in society. It's holding people back. So this is a very straightforward spiritual solution to a material problem, but we have to accept it. So anyway, I've said more than enough about this. Let's go on quickly to the next slide. Next, yeah. Okay, mundane food relief. This is something that Sri Bhakti Vikash Maharaj has said much about, and with good reason. There's a certain theme here, that there's like a tendency toward the mundane. So if you look at this, I don't know how well you can see this, but this is from our midday meals program website. I'll just read it briefly. ISKCON Food Relief Foundation is a non-religious, non-sectarian, and not-for-profit charitable trust registered with the Charity Commission. So non-religious. Well, that's how we're representing ourselves to people. It's a strategic program to liberate the underprivileged children from the scourge of hunger and malnutrition. But what about, what about liberating the wealthy people from, their good food or their non-offered food? There's a discrimination here, an unwarranted discrimination. Prabhupada, when he wanted prasadam distribution in Mayapur, he actually wanted rooms where people could come and take, and he wanted turnstiles so that people could, you could stop people from taking prasadam with them, because if they take the prasadam, mix it with their fish, that's an offense. Yeah. So oftentimes what's done is that the prasadam is prepared, it's delivered by people who aren't devotees, it's just put in the place, people just do whatever they want with it, and then they go away. So that's disrespect to Krishna. Krishna even agreed to accept that food. So another thing, it's a project of the government of India and being implemented by ISKCON Food Relief Foundation. It's food, not prasadam. It's being implemented in government and municipal schools for the benefit of underprivileged children. But again, where are you getting your definition of underprivileged? That's a mundane calculation. You can be poor, but if you're a devotee, you have everything. And if you're rich and you have nothing, who's the underprivileged? So it's mundane. It's a very pernicious idea that people are immoral if they don't have money. Very pernicious. Or people are moral or if they do have money. And finally, it's done without any commercial motive, and the benefits will be available to students at large without any discrimination on the grounds of religion, caste, creed, or sex, but you already just discriminate on the basis of income. Yeah. So it's just untenable. So Prabhupada's statement, compare and contrast, he says, quoting the very famous verse, 10:232, Ye ne ravindaksha vimuktamaninaст vayashtabhavad avishuddha buddhaya. Because they have no right information how to become fully satisfied, therefore they are avishuddha buddhaya. Their intelligence is not yet pure. It is impure, again, material. Aruya kritrena param param tata patantyado nadrita yushmaram grayaha. Therefore you will find the Mayavadi sannyasis. They come again to serve humanity, to serve animals, to serve this, that, country, society. This is Mayavada. Avishuddha buddhaya. He could not stand the exalted post of being servitor and the served. Now, I'm not implying that we become Mayavadis or that the devotees who are into this have become Mayavadis, but there's a certain, the words patantyadha, which literally means fall down, are certainly applicable, because we're not anymore working on the transcendental platform. We're not helping people out of the cycle of birth and death. So there's an important and detrimental qualitative change to our movement and the efforts and the money we're spending on these activities that are really that are questionable at best and probably not helping the people that are supposed to be helped by this. Next slide. Balkanization. Now, this topic here, there are some people in our society who believe that the reason ISKCON is not flourishing in the West is because there are too many Indians coming to our temples in the West. I disagree. The reason I disagree with that is because I used to live in a temple where many, many Indians used to come. That was Chicago, ISKCON Chicago. And I used to do full-time preaching. So, let me just read this on the right-hand side. This is from one of Burke Rocheford's more recent articles. Actually came out in 2016. I can't read on the monitor here, but the title of the article is up there. He says, and it's an article on Hinduization and ISKCON. I think The Changing Faces of Gods, the Hinduization of the Hare Krishna movement. That's the title?
Hinduization, the conception of life and desire to enjoy life.
No. At the very bottom.
That's like what you said.
Yeah, what I said. Okay. So let me read his full statement here. As ISKCON's local temples progressively Hinduized, many non-Indian devotees found little reason to participate in an ISKCON temple community. Instead of being a spiritual haven allowing for worship and socializing with devotee friends, ISKCON temples became sources of estrangement. As one devotee remarked, quote, "Even older devotees don't come anymore to many ISKCON temples because it is demoralizing to see these compromises in Srila Prabhupada's temples by devotees who know it's wrong." At a 2005 meeting of a dozen longtime Western devotees at ISKCON's Atlanta, Georgia temple, each of those present acknowledged that they only infrequently attend the Sunday feast at the temple because of the large number of Indians present. Moreover, when one of them mentioned that he would never bring a new Western person to the temple because they would be put off by so many Indians, others quickly nodded their heads in agreement. So, when I read this, my question is, what were those people doing the rest of the week? They were going to jobs, they were earning money, and probably not doing much service in and around the temple of Prabhupada's movement. So, if they're not doing that, then who are they bringing to Krishna consciousness? Now, I say this, I compare and contrast this with my experience as a brahmachari in the 1980s, late 80s, living in the Chicago temple. There are many Indians there, and I had full freedom every day to go out and preach to the world and bring them to the temple. And people would come, Westerners would come to the temple, so many, in addition to the Indian congregation. So there's a certain theme here, throughout all these slides that that can be noted. And one is that we become more hedonistic as a society. Okay? That the emphasis now is not on vairagya, but on comfortable living. So with these devotees, and I can't say, spare myself completely of this accusation, certainly, because I also have a job, I'm working in the world, but I know what life used to be like. And I know it doesn't have to be like that. And certainly, one of the successes, at least we should consider, one of the successes of a local temple is, do we have a brahmachari ashram? Do we have brahmacharis in it? Not just one or two, but 10, 12, 20. I was in a major ISKCON temple recently. There was an opening, major temple in Texas. Well, sorry, didn't mean to say that. And they had a huge opening ceremony. Devotees from all over the place, all over the came. And then the next week, there was virtually no one there for the class or the morning programs. Virtually no one. Maybe 7, 8, 10 people. That's it. Huge temple. So the problem is not that there's a lack of money, it's a lack of vairagya. We should be talking to people, telling people, give up your stupid college education, give up your stupid job, move into the temple. It's all useless, it's all worthless. We used to preach that way. And as far as the Indians, plurality of Indians, well, look at the H-1B program. Of course, there's huge number of Indians here. It's not because we're wearing dhotis and, the Indian people are coming. Most Indians who come here don't wear dhotis. Isn't it? So they're not attracted by that. Ladies, of course, still, like to wear saris and, they're very... But it's not the problem is not dhotis. It's not even Indian food. We were just in fact, I went on one program to the prison with Sridhar Shyam Prabhu some time ago, And we served the prasadam there, and the prasadam was so good that the prisoners were telling us that this is the best food we've ever eaten, even including the Thanksgiving dinners they serve us here. Jai. Haribol Shri Rasham Prabhu. So there's no problem with their food. You know, we don't have to cook apple strudel, you know, and every, you know, like that. You know, or veggie burgers, or, you know, it's like, no, we don't have to do that. The problem is lack of vairagya. That's the thing. It's not being cultivated in the grahastas, so the grahasta communities are not producing brahmacharis. Their sons are not growing up to be brahmacharis. You have maybe hundreds of devotees in a community. You know, they're all going to school, they're learning, you know, mundane subjects. So anyway, what's going on here is that the problem is that balkanization, and so it goes hand in hand. If you're more materialistic, well, then you're going to be thinking more and more in terms of I and mine. This is my community, we're Westerners, you're Indians, because also you're lacking vairagya. You're thinking in those material terms already. So naturally, you're also going to think like this. And also, one thing to say about Rochefort, he's a sociologist, and sociology as a field is deeply influenced by Marxism. So you can see that he's thinking here in terms of these social categories, the haves and have-nots. You know, in Marx's classic formulation, the means of production determine the relations of production, and so forth. And so because you have these haves in a position of power, and that's the Indians, and they have money, they're calling the shots, therefore they are oppressing this small group of Westerners who don't have money. That's how he sees it. But we don't see it that way because we see the spirit soul here. It doesn't have to be that way. The problem is a lack of vairagya, and with that, people are seeing things in material ways, and then you have this problem, you know, either real or imagined. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide. I don't have any comments here, but I think this epitomizes everything we've been talking about in terms of the effect of materialism. So you have this. I have big goals at the XYZ Academy. If you know what it is, you know what it is. You don't need to talk about it. If you don't, this is a real ISKCON school. Can you read that? What it says there?
No, it's too much sunlight.
Kids have big goals at the academy.
Read what the kid is saying in the balloon.
I want to be a
Hare Krishna doctor.
I want to be a Hare Krishna doctor when I grow up. Okay? Hare Krishna doctor. I want to be a Hare Krishna doctor.
What's the Hare Krishna?
Well, the whole point is he wants to be a doctor, right? How about a Hare Krishna? I want to be a devotee of Krishna when I grow up. Big difference there. This is Karma Mishra Bhakti. And you can't blame this on the Indians because in this particular community, a significant portion, if not majority, the kid is, he's not an Indian kid. Obviously, it's somebody. So that's the values of that is, you can say, reasonably, with some reasonable surety, that's the values of that community. That it's important not only to be a Hare Krishna, but it's also important to be a doctor, or to have some good job, or make a lot of money. And what I'm saying is that is the problem. So throughout all these things, welfare work, the marriage life, the whole conception of marriage life, you have this common thread of hedonism. The desire for wealth. Na danam, na janam, na sundarim, kavitam bhaj. So how is this education going to help someone become a devotee? It's not. It's going to be an interference with that person's devotional life. The big problem is that's happening. That's happening with the imprimatur of our leadership chain. Somewhere, certainly, it's happening. It's a top-down thing. I was talking with another devotee. There's like a sister school of this. he's involved with that school, and we were talking about it, and I was pointing out this problem. And he said to me, but the parents don't trust the schools. And I said, what are the parents? They're concerned about that. So I told him, I said, I repeated Prabhupada's statement that he told a story, an anecdote. Bengali man in Bengal, someone stole his plate, so he vowed to eat on the floor. He wasn't going to get any more plates, use any more plates to eat. So he said, same thing. He said, if you're going to train these people to be swamis, you're calling it the Swami Academy, you should really be training them to be swamis, masters of the senses. But he never corresponded with me or communicated with me again after that. So, what to do? Sometimes it's like crying in the wilderness. So at this point, I more or less covered everything I wanted to, and we're over time. Are there any questions? Yes, Prabhu.
So,
Is there a microphone for him?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So you were talking about Vairagya, right?
Yeah.
So like us preaching in New York, we're doing the High Nam every day. So I understand, when people say you wouldn't want to, rather you wouldn't bring them to the ISKCON like Sunday feast. I think it's better when people come home to our ashram and it's us guys and we're just hanging out with them. So I'm trying to understand what you meant by lack of Vairagya.
Well, lack of vairagya. Who's going to live the life of a brahmachari or a poor brahmana? People are choosing instead to have lucrative careers, or train their children, send their children through 25 years of school so they can make money. That's a lack of vairagya.
Okay. And also, you were talking about like how when your entire goal is to make money, you don't have. Your children also have the same mentality, like you send them to school to be a doctor or whatever. And like, we ourselves in our ashram experience it, like when sometimes devotee children come, they look at us and like, oh man, you guys are fanatics. What are you doing, chanting 16 rounds in the morning, waking up so early? So I agree with what you were saying.
Well, yeah, it's it's what's the priority. And when you're in the mode of passion, it was. Hari Vilas Prabhu was very nicely explaining to me earlier this morning that, if you're under the modes of nature, you can't even understand it, even when it's explained nicely. So there's a lack of purity there, and that lack of purity is primarily coming from bad association, association with non-devotees.
Thank you.
Certainly. Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhu said, thank you for a very nice talk. It's very enlightening.
Thank you.
But did I understand you right? You said in general the theme of everything that you said essentially is boiling down to lack of vairagya.
It's one of them. You see, these problems tend to cluster together. It's like if you're associating with non-devotees, you also, you also have the problem of lack of vairagya. It's like they're related problems, but they're distinct in themselves too. So, like for example, there was someone at a recent lecture. He was actually a sannyasi saying, "Well, we made a mistake before that we told people to be too renounced and we were too fanatic," and so that's, you can call that an unforced error. Okay, it wasn't that. We don't need to tell people that. We do need to tell people the other thing, that you should give up things. That's the special value of sannyasis. They set an example of vairagya, and they preach that. They tell you to. Why are you sending your children to karmi schools? Make them a brahmachari. Like that. Or why do you have this job? Why not go live on the farm produce Krishna conscious vegetables. Become a preacher. We don't need more widgets in the world. We need more Krishna consciousness in the world. Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Well, I remember one conversation I've heard several times with the disciple of Prabhupada told me that there are gurukuls, so there's some concern that the children won't learn how to survive in the world or get the practical material skills in training. And Prabhupada's response was, yes, we want them to be unfit for employment.
Wow.
Jai, yes.
Wow.
That's the spirit. That's really what we should be saying. We should be telling people this. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, Prabhu?
It's not a question basically.
Thank you very much, Prabhu, for your wonderful talk. Thank you. So, in case of the families where a husband or wife is a devotee and the other one is not a devotee, in such families, it's really it becomes difficult to, put the kids into full time, make them brahmachari or whatever, because the spouse is not really, they don't agree to that, so it becomes difficult in such situations.
Yeah. Therefore, one of the criteria, one of the symptoms of motive goodness is that you perform your duty without expectation of result. There's what is it? Karyam it yeviyat karyam. What is it? Karyam it karyam. What is it? What's the rest of it? Oh, that's another good one. Yeah. Mapale shukarat. You're not attached to the result. So you do what you can, and then you leave that result up to Krishna. But if you do what you're doing, at least you're transcendentally situated. You're rising above the modes. You're not acting according to the pushings and pullings of the modes, but you're acting according to higher guidance, the Shastras. Hare Krishna. That incidentally is also why, just because if your husband is a jerk, you shouldn't leave him, or your wife is a witch, you shouldn't leave her.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I'm very pleased to hear this lecture because it brings up a lot of contradictions and phenomena that we have observed as devotees, new or advanced, that is going on in various places that is not clear why this is happening. So this whole lecture has so many pieces that need to be assimilated, discussed, and understood. But I want to share and get your response about the lack of renunciation is behind all these different things. And the renunciation is the last piece in the Bhagavad Gita. And it is the last piece in our development as devotees. So we go through all these phases of clearing of the dust that have been collected over millions of lifetimes, and we do some of the karmic clearing in various lifetimes. And Krishna is very merciful, so he doesn't just dump a huge load on us in any one lifetime that is setting us up for failure. So we see these things happening, we experience them, like we talk about the marriage situation, like the education of the children, or even the food for life example. What I have appreciated from the beginning of my relationship with Krishna consciousness is the understanding of different devotees at different levels and the experience that they bring. So Yes, I agree with you that the things are so bad materially at this time that we need spiritual solutions for these issues. But people are not ready for it because we have been addicts to materialism in all these lifetimes. And there is no addict or very few that can walk away cold turkey out of a pattern of thinking and behavior. So I remember Bhakti Swami sharing with us from one of his many world trips how an example of a pattern that he has seen in devotees all over the world is that they are chanting Hare Krishna. They sincerely want to rise above the modes of material nature. But the patterns that they are bringing in this life, either from the family relationships that are so broken that the children become damaged, and then they carry this psychological damage with them throughout their life, because the mind is so blocked with these traumas that even chanting Hare Krishna, the penetration of the power of the holy name, that the power of the holy name cannot penetrate that consciousness to really see the progress that you expect individually, and others who have greater experience than you can see, because there are things that happen as you chant, when you begin to clear. Like your desires change, your taste for different things. You wonder how you even was interested in that thing at one time. So you realize your progress. But if you do not deal with these mind patterns in a specific way, and it does not have to be secularized, because you are basing your progress and your entire life on scripture, on guru, and devotee association. So there is a lot to be looked at here. And I would like to offer that your marriage your problems didn't just melt away. Every time you had a confrontation that you thought that you couldn't get through, that was a progressive step that you didn't realize at the moment. It just looked black at the time. But you moved on, because every time you air something from the mind or the heart, it is cathartic. It is like a relief. And if you are airing it to somebody who has that deeper understanding of spiritual, we're on a spiritual journey here, then even though you didn't seem to come to a conclusion at that time, this was a healing process. So it wasn't by magic, but the mercy of Krishna is always the biggest factor, the Krishna factor.
Yeah.
Lord was helping you all along.
Yeah. It was. My point wasn't that magic happened, that something unexplainable. But in giving that example, that the effect, which was only perceivable later, after the fact. And to address your point about mind patterns, there's certainly, say like a lot of marriage counselors are into trying to get people to follow a particular pattern. And while those patterns may closely resemble patterns that we're supposed to adopt as devotees, they're very different. So, for example, the idea that we're going to sit down, like husband and wife, we're going to make a list of things we like to do together, and we're going to do those. Well, that's a pattern, okay? That's a very common pattern in the marriage counseling, except the problem with that is it's based on, it's a conception of happiness that's based on contact of the objects with the senses, which is motive passion. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to actually replace those patterns with patterns authorized by Krishna. So the one conception that we're trying to establish is the pattern of the mode of goodness. So therefore, and we have to understand these things according to the Shastras, because there's no other way to understand them, what the difference is. So, like I explained, when we're doing something for Guru and Krishna, and specifically, in our case, it was a very personal thing for Guru and Krishna, but it was for Guru and Krishna nonetheless. Just staying together for Guru and Krishna is mode of goodness. Do you agree?
I do.
Yeah.
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
And I'm very clear about the conception of, the secular marriage counselor versus the understanding of marriage that we have in Krishna consciousness. But there are steps that need to be made anyway in order to progress to that change that you're looking for. So the importance is, what is the object or the goal of the marriage in general? I appreciate the difference, yes.
Yeah. So the object, okay, we have to understand these things primarily by Shastra. Krishna says, Ya Shastram vidimutsraja vartate kamakarataha, that you have to understand. I mean, this is Krishna himself saying you have to understand by Shastra, because if we're not guided by Shastra, and he makes it very clear, we're speculating. And I don't just say that as a pejorative, but it is not possible to understand clearly what is to be done and what is not to be done. So that's why, in order to understand the difference between what is the secular counseling giving and what is a Krishna conscious advice giving, we have to understand, first of all, what are the different conceptions of happiness. And like you say, there's a goal. And what is the goal? One big difference between us and the marriage counselors is that our primary goal in marriage is not to have happy marriages. Because you can worship a demigod, right? You can worship Shiva, you can worship Uma for a marriage. Men will worship Uma. Please give me a good wife. Women will worship Shiva. Please give me a good husband. That's karma. Okay? We do not want karma. What we are interested in as devotees is we are interested in transcending the modes. So some people, they say, well, what if you're married to a jerk? Okay? Or, he really doesn't, he says bad things to you. So like the story of Sukanya in the ninth canto of the Bhagavatam. Okay, she just, she married a real cantankerous, old, grumpy man, but she still did her duty. And the point of that, or at least one of the points in that, is even in terms of material happiness, you should still follow Vedic principles. Because why? There are two conceptions of happiness, two ways you can become happy in this world. One is to increase your acquisition of material goods, your material enjoyment, become a millionaire or a billionaire or something like that, or you can minimize your needs your needs for material things. Now, anyone can do that. That's the beauty thing. Anybody can do that. And what we're saying is that by following this path of vairagya, by following this nivritti marg, this is our unique selling point to the world, by the way. Practically no other religion in the world is promoting nivritti. And the reason they're not promoting nivritti is because they do not have a transcendent conception of the self. So what we're saying is that minimize your needs. The more you minimize your material needs by following this process, and part of that, you're tolerating. You're in a marriage, you're tolerating so much, but you're becoming purified. That's where you start to become happy. And that's where I said that this was the magic, is that you stick with this. You do your duty because it ought to be done. And you giving up association, material association and desire for the fruit, that's mode of goodness. Then you will become happy. So we're saying that, we should say this, that you guys that are doing the marriage counsel, we've got a much better program. Because this is how you can be happy. You don't even have this conception of happiness.
So, are we talking about non-devotee secular marriage counselors, or are we talking about devotees who are marriage counselors?
Both, because they're both deriving their training from the same set of from the set of common principles. Prabhuji, you have a question in the back?
I have a comment and a question. First, a comment. It's explained about Lord Chaitanya, Vairagya Vidya Bhakti Bhajan, that Lord Chaitanya appeared in this world to teach real knowledge. And that real knowledge, as he was exemplifying, had two aspects to it. One is called Ashakti, and the other is called Jitendriya. Ashakti means detachment from everything that is negative for developing Krishna consciousness. And Jitendriya is gaining control of the mind and the senses by keeping them always engaged in Krishna consciousness. By those two principles, one develops Vairagya Vidya, knowledge by which you can always remain in Krishna consciousness, fully engaged, without the influence of negative things that take you away from Krishna consciousness, because you're detached from them. And number two, by that constant engagement, you have control of your mind and senses. Therefore, you're not attracted to the glitter of material nature and false promises of finding a stable situation of perpetuating material happiness. There's no such thing as self-perpetuating material happiness. We can never adjust to the material situation where we'll be always happy. However, by the principle of Vairagya Vidya, we voluntarily downsize our material aspirations and desires and increase our spiritual desires for understanding Krishna and engaging in Krishna's service. Then we become happy. Real happiness is Prema Pramata Mahan, developing pure love for Radha and Krishna. Then you become eternally happy. So my question is, there's a right way and a wrong way to do everything in this world. So there is definitely a right way of prasada distribution. There is definitely a right way of marriage counseling. There is definitely a right way of educating our children. We can understand the wrong way. Anything that's infested with atheistic and non-devotional philosophy is the wrong way. What is the right way of prasada distribution? What is the right way of education of our children? And what is the right way of having successful marriages?
Thank you very much for your excellent elucidation on happiness, Prabhu. This is wonderful. And to answer your question, practically, in terms of our society, or International Society for Krishna Consciousness, because by now there are many different gurus in our movement with many different disciples, and hence we have many different spiritual lines that emphasize some aspects of Prabhupada's teachings more than others might, and others will emphasize some more. In effect, what we have here is ISKCON is becoming more and more of a confederation of different sampradayas. And so hence, in that situation, the way to move forward together and to come to a consensus on what is the right way is to more and more base our convictions on Shastra. So just like, for example, when is in the Antya-lila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, when a Brahmana from Bengal wanted to recite some play he wrote to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And what happened was, so he went to Bhagavanacharya, and Bhagavanacharya, you please listen to this because you're close to Swarup Damodar Goswami, and then if you like it, then he might like it, and he'll let Chaitanya Mahaprabhu let me recite it to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what happened is that the devotees were going, and then they were all hearing the play and say, yes, this is a very good play, this is very wonderful. And then everybody except Swarup Damodar Goswami liked it. And then Swarup Damodar Goswami explained what was wrong with the play. And when he explained it, because, okay, all the devotees liked it, so prima facie, the play is good, so you have to give an explanation. So he explained from Shastra, he gave many innumerable statements from Shastra to explain what the faults in the play were. So in the same way, because there are differences, we might see, either because we might not understand things correctly, or we might even have a different emphasis or a different understanding. The gold standard is still going to be Shastra in terms of pramanas. And so determining what the right way is going to be, we have to justify it in terms of the pramanas. And so with reference to Bhakti Vikas Swami's recent book, Women, Masters and Mothers, one of the things that one of his, foundational statements in putting forward the book is that because there's this unity of thought that pervades all of Prabhupada's teachings, that we should refer first and foremost to the books. So especially the books and Shastra, Prabhupada's books and Shastra, those should be our first pramanas in understanding these things and coming to some agreement on what is the right way to do these things. Is that okay, Prabhu?
You want to be specific about, you were already about marriage.
You were already specific about the right way of marriage, acting out of duty. What about food distribution, prasadam distribution, and education?
Well, in terms of those, I haven't delved into it in too much detail, some detail, but too much detail. But the general answer is that it needs to conform as closely as possible to Shastra and to Srila Prabhupada's teachings and purports in his books. That's the starting point. Now, often how these things have been solved for a long time is that we seek the advice or we seek the counsel of some devotee who is very close to Prabhupada, either as a secretary or as a personal servant or like that. And that's wonderful. But in terms of the hierarchy of authority, because we're people and we have our faults and we don't have we're not perfect, whereas Shastra is. So we should start from that. Generally, in any of these areas, we should start from Shastra and Prabhupada's books. Is that okay? Would you like to add anything, Prabhuji?
Well, the Lord Chaitanya had two astras for spreading Krishna consciousness. One of them was not preaching. It was Harinam Sankirtan, massive Harinam Sankirtan, and massive prasadam distribution. So obviously there's a right way to have massive prasadam distribution. Any time that we give out something to the public, such as the holy name or prasadam, it has to always be accompanied with knowledge. That's why it says vairagya vidya. So you have to figure out how to instruct the public at the same time as you feed them. Well, the publicity that you read about the food distribution completely obviates any attempt to instruct the public about what is prasadam. At least in that particular instance, the way they're presenting it. Lord Chaitanya would do both of these things in such a way that people became happy. Once they became happy and ecstatic, then they ask questions. So if you just drop off food at a food shelter, and then they mix the prasadam with meat or other things, not only they don't become happy, but they have no curiosity at all about what is prasadam. So the devotees have to do ecstatic sankirtan, and along with the sankirtan, distribute ecstatic prasadam with the right attitude. It's a holy sacrament to take prasadam. And once those two elements are there, people become ecstatic. And people want to be happy. And if you help them become happy, they're interested in finding out how can they continually be happy like this.
Mm-hmm.
So the knowledge naturally comes with the proper performance of Hare Kirtan and the proper way of giving out prasad.
Mm-hmm.
It's not simply to gain notoriety with the government or with the public. It's a sacred duty of the devotee to use these two ashras that Lord Chaitanya used to spread this movement. And secondly, education. It's a conundrum because Prabhupada did say first the varna, then the ashram.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a sense, we see that in the H1B1 Indians who come to this country. Most of them have some connection to Hinduism and somewhat to Krishna consciousness, but it's never been formalized. And then they come to this country. Before they come, they go through specific education to get a good job. And they come here, they get job training, and then they're able to earn $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, $200,000 a year. So their varna is taken care of. And then if they're really lucky, they come in contact with ISKCON and some temple in which it's very, they're actually preaching Krishna consciousness. And all of a sudden, their varna is taken care of. Now they understand their ashrama. Now they're fixed for the rest of their life. In the case of my generation, when we joined Krishna consciousness, gave up everything to join, and went through years of ecstatic activity in Krishna consciousness, and then all of a sudden, somebody wants to get married, and then they're faced with the dilemma: they have some children, they need a place to live, they need a washing machine, they need a credit card, they need this, they need that, and all of a sudden, you have to make a living to do that. And we gave up our fast track toward higher education to get a good job, and all of a sudden we feel disenfranchised. So many devotees had to scramble. Some succeeded, and many did not succeed in being able to put food on the table and maintain a family. And because of that, there were a lot of breakups in Krishna consciousness. So because of that, many devotees felt as if they were cheated out of their best years. That's not true, but they take it like that.
Yeah, I say that they feel cheated because they have the wrong idea.
Yes.
One idea is, going back to the point of marriage. You have to do a job now. It's not that you do a good job, but that you do a job, and that you live on whatever you do. So the dissatisfaction is first of all coming from the lack of at least a commitment to vairagya. Even if one is not very renounced, one should not resent the principle. The second thing is that job, or just having an occupation to earn money, to earn a livelihood, it's important in terms of varnashram, in terms of varna dharma, but it's only secondary importance to the primary goal of reducing sex in society. In Manu Smriti 9.6, this is the same chapter where we have the verse, Na striya svatantriyam arhati, that independence is not to be given to women. So following on from that is this verse. It says, Imam hi sarvavarnanam pashyanto dharmam uttamam yatanti hi, Yatanti rakshatum bharya Bhartaro Durbala Api, that it is seen that the highest duty, it is seen that the highest duty of all the Varnas is the protection of women. It's Dharmam Uttamam. So it said this is so important that even a weak husband must strive to protect his wife. So the whole point, and this is what connects the Varnashram, the Varna Dharma, to Vairagya, is that we're to reduce we're supposed to reduce the impulse of sex attraction in society. That is the primary goal of Varnashram. And so with that, perhaps if someone at least has that understanding, then he can perhaps, put up with all these other problems. But that's really that's really what the goal of the occupations. You're supposed to, I've seen no other verse like that to talk about what is the ultimate goal of Varna Dharma. But that's what it's for. Because Pumsastriya Mentani Bhava Metam, the basic principle of material life. So that's what Varnashram helps us do. It helps us slack. And in one lecture, Prabhupada actually says that if not for that, there's no reason for this Varnashram. And that's probably why that Varnashram has not taken off in our society yet, because people think of Varna or Varna Dharma in terms of a kind of soft Marxism. The means of production determine the relations of production. And given a lot of our members' backgrounds coming from the hippie movement, I'm not surprised that we think of it like that. But earning is not all there is to Varnashram, and it's not even the central point of Varnashram. So, sorry, I maybe said a little too much there. Anything else, Prabhu?
Well, obviously, what you said is correct. There are 4 ashramas, and 3 of them there's no sexual activity at all. And in the ashrama of married life, the whole idea is sex only for procreating children. Anything above that will cause misery in married life. And the way to, let's say, achieve that is when the husband and wife understand that the goal of their marriage is to engender Krishna conscious kids. And the continuity of the sexual act is actually bringing them up to be Krishna conscious. Sex is something that it's like adding gasoline to a fire; it never goes out. Mm-hmm. It's only when you sublimate that with the sense of duty of raising the kids and leading. The husband has to be actually approved. They can teach the kids to be Krishna conscious and also inspire his wife. And the wife participates in everybody going back to Godhead. And that way, it's a success. Any other way, it will be a failure.
Thank you, Prabhuji. I think we're way over time, aren't we? Yeah. Okay, so we'll table any other further discussions on these points for later. And Hare Krishna.